I watched Chadwick deliver the news like he was reading quarterly stock dividends off a glossy terminal. He sat behind his wide mahogany desk, wearing that polished corporate smile that felt completely manufactured in a business school seminar. "We are restructuring the entire regional supply chain framework," he announced, leaning back in his leather chair with practiced condescension. "We have located a candidate who can modernize our logistics network for 50% of your current compensation. Digital transformation, optimization of human resources. You understand how the corporate ecosystem evolves." My name is Walter Vance. I am 54 years old. I have been working in industrial logistics since I was 21, and I recognize corporate arrogance when it tries to masquerade as strategic brilliance. Chadwick Drake was 33 years old, possessed a freshly printed Master of Business Administration degree from an Ivy League university, and had 0 days of actual hands-on warehouse experience. Corporate leadership had transferred him from the Regional Administrative Center 22 months ago because he filled every slide deck with buzzwords like synergy, artificial intelligence integration, and disruptive operational paradigms. He had that distinct habit of dropping academic terminology like it was absolute gospel, then grinning as though his business degree automatically elevated him above everyone else in the room. He used that exact same smirk right now as he explained why my 14 years of managing Heartland Logistics, Inc. were merely legacy operations that required immediate liquidation. 14 years I had dedicated to building Heartland Logistics. 14 relentless years spent constructing a multi-state distribution matrix that managed $350 million worth of precision automotive parts annually across 12 Midwestern states. When I first inherited the operation 14 years ago, the regional distribution hubs were utter chaos. Inventory numbers were completely fabricated, components were lost in unindexed staging zones, and Tier 1 vehicle manufacturers were threatening to terminate our contracts due to catastrophic delivery delays. The previous operations head had surrendered after 6 months, declaring the logistical complexity impossible to structure. I accepted the position back then because I believed in building things that last. My wife Sarah was expanding her independent real estate brokerage, and our twin sons Brandon and Nathan were preparing for high school before aiming for engineering degrees at top state universities. Mortgages, tuition funds, and family security do not yield to corporate excuses. During those initial 11 months on the job, I routinely worked until midnight. I memorized every mechanical component in our catalog, analyzed every supplier delivery rhythm, and identified which manufacturers delivered precision engineering versus which required constant quality verification. I discovered that specialized transmission assemblies required climate-controlled staging during extreme winter months, heavy brake components demanded custom mechanical rigging, and specific chemical sealants could never be stored in proximity due to chemical volatility regulations. I personally authored custom tracking algorithms that monitored inventory flux in real time, engineered spatial optimization models for warehouse floor plans, and built rock-solid relationships with key suppliers until our enterprise became the gold standard of the region. It took 4 exhausting years before the entire network ran with flawless precision. After that, it simply worked. Parts flowed seamlessly from heavy manufacturing plants to automotive dealerships. Inventory variance hovered near zero. My former executive superior, Harold Montgomery, used to slap my shoulder and remark that I had taken the most chaotic operation in the Midwest and made it look effortless. Then, Chadwick arrived 22 months ago. He never stepped foot onto the loading docks during cold morning shifts. He never spoke with truck drivers or warehouse managers. He never cared to understand why certain inventory buffers existed or why custom supplier agreements were structured around seasonal demands. All he desired were clean executive dashboards that made him look like a tech-forward prodigy when presenting to senior corporate leadership. He would constantly demand real-time analytics, automated performance indicators, and sleek slide decks to demonstrate operational excellence. I produced them every single quarter because that was my professional duty. But Chadwick began treating those immaculate results as if they happened by magic. convincing himself that anyone with a spreadsheet could direct a $350 million supply network. He did not see 14 years of deep institutional mastery disguised as simplicity. He saw my $135,000 annual salary as a line item he could erase to boost his quarterly margin metric. "We have already selected your successor," Chadwick continued, maintaining his smug posture. "He begins on Monday morning. You have until 4:15 in the afternoon today to compile your operating procedures and transition your entire operational workflow." "Transition to whom?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly even. "You state he starts on Monday, yet today is late Thursday afternoon." "Create a comprehensive knowledge transfer document," Chadwick replied, waving a dismissive hand. "It should not require extensive effort considering how systematically you claim everything operates." I never claimed logistics was effortless. Harold Montgomery said that because I spent 14 years resolving every friction point before it reached the executive desk. But arguing with Chadwick was pointless. His mind was settled, driven by executive hubris. This meeting was merely a corporate formality before he executed his short-sighted plan. "Very well," I said, standing up. His smile flickered for a fraction of a second. He had undoubtedly anticipated anger, pleading, or an emotional outburst. I denied him that spectacle. I turned and walked straight back to my corner office overlooking the central distribution terminal. It was not a lavish space, just a sturdy wooden desk, steel filing cabinets, and wall-to-wall shelves containing industrial compliance manuals, customs logistics protocols, and supplier contracts spanning 14 years. I sat at my computer and opened a blank document. I began typing out core operational parameters, primary vendor contact protocols, lead times for custom transmission rebuilds, buffer thresholds for brake component delays during severe weather, chemical compatibility matrices under environmental compliance statutes, and access codes for the proprietary spatial algorithms I had developed. 9 pages in, the futility of the exercise became overwhelmingly clear. A theoretical document could never convey 14 years of instinct. It could not teach a novice how to read the subtle warning signs of supply chain disruption, how to negotiate with an angry vendor chief, or how to handle emergency rerouting during severe blizzards. This was institutional intelligence, forged through years of trial, error, and unwavering commitment. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, Chadwick leaned into my doorway. "How is the documentation progressing?" he asked casually. "It is moving forward," I replied, without looking up from my screen. He nodded in self-absorbed satisfaction and strolled away. None of my office colleagues brought up my impending exit, though the atmosphere in the hallway was heavy. Word travels fast in corporate offices, but when an executive is wielding the axe, employees keep their heads down to protect their own paychecks. I harbored no bitterness toward them. Everyone has mortgages to pay and families to support. By 4:15 in the afternoon, I printed what I had written, placed the stack of papers on the center of my desk, and shut down my computer. I packed my personal belongings into a single brown cardboard box. A ceramic coffee mug from a company retreat, 8 years ago, a heavy flannel jacket I wore during cold warehouse audits, framed photos of Sarah, Brandon, and Nathan, and a small potted desk plant that had survived on minimal sunlight for a decade. 14 years of dedicated service packed into a single box. I walked out of Heartland Logistics, Inc. without saying another word. I drove home slowly through the thick industrial traffic, the cardboard box sitting quietly on the passenger seat beside me. When I pulled into our driveway, the house was bright and welcoming. Through the front window, I could see Sarah at the dining table reviewing property closing documents. Brandon, a junior studying mechanical engineering, was working through fluid dynamics problems at the kitchen counter, while Nathan, a sophomore studying computer science, was practicing acoustic guitar in the living room. It was a serene Thursday evening scene that suddenly felt intensely fragile. I walked into the kitchen and set the box down on the counter. Sarah looked up with a warm smile, but her eyes immediately caught the cardboard box and the gravity written across my face. She set her pen down. "What happened, Walter?" she asked softly. Brandon stopped typing on his laptop, and Nathan set his guitar aside. The room went quiet as all three of them focused entirely on me. "I was terminated today," I said plainly. There was no sense in softening the reality. A heavy silence lingered for 10 seconds. Sarah stood up, walked across the room, and wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight without saying a word. Brandon stared at the floor, while Nathan looked at me in disbelief. "How is that even possible?" Brandon asked, his voice filled with frustration. "You built that entire Midwestern network from scratch. You have spent 14 years making sure that company never failed a single shipment. Chadwick decided my 14 years of experience could be replaced by a fresh graduate for 50% of my salary," I explained. "He called it digital transformation and operational optimization." "That is complete madness," Nathan said angrily. "He has been there less than 2 years and does not know the first thing about actual distribution." "What about severance package terms?" Sarah asked, pulling back slightly to look into my eyes. "None were offered," I said. "Chadwick treated it as an immediate statutory layoff without proper executive review. In his rush to cut costs, he did not even consult legal counsel or follow statutory protocols under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under 29 U.S. Code, Section 2101, which governs major employment shifts and corporate restructurings. He simply handed me a notice and demanded I clear my desk." Sarah frowned, her mind instantly analyzing the situation. "Our tuition commitments for Brandon and Nathan total $55,000 for the upcoming academic year. Real estate commissions are lucrative when deals close, but they are subject to market volatility. My $135,000 salary had been the unwavering anchor of our family stability for 14 years. We will navigate this together," Sarah stated firmly, taking my hands. "I can take on additional commercial listings, and the boys can look into university research assistantships. We are a family, Walter. A short-sighted corporate manager cannot diminish your worth." Her faith in me was humbling. That night I lay awake staring at the bedroom ceiling, calculating numbers and weighing our options. 28 years of marriage had taught us how to weather storms, but being cast aside after 14 years of flawless dedication left a deep, aching burn in my chest. The next morning, Friday, I woke up early out of pure habit. I thought about Wallace Abernathy. Wallace was the executive vice president of operations at our corporate headquarters. He oversaw 6 regional divisions and managed over 400 logistics personnel across the entire country. Chadwick reported to a regional director who reported to Wallace, meaning Chadwick rarely had direct contact with executive leadership. However, Wallace and I shared a professional relationship that spanned 9 solid years. 9 years ago, during a severe national supply chain crisis, one of our primary transmission suppliers attempted to exploit Heartland Logistics by imposing a 400% price markup on emergency components. The corporate purchasing division was in a panic and prepared to approve the extortionate rate to meet assembly deadlines. I intervened, requested 4 hours, and utilized my personal industry network to secure alternative, certified transmission assemblies at standard market rates. That single action saved Heartland Logistics $260,000 in a single afternoon. Wallace Abernathy had called me personally that evening to express his deep respect for my operational initiative and integrity. Since that event 9 years ago, Wallace and I maintained a tradition of meeting for a professional lunch once every quarter whenever he visited our regional hub. We had a lunch scheduled for late Friday afternoon at 4:45 at a quiet steakhouse near the primary distribution terminal. Our lunches were straightforward, no corporate pretense, just honest discussions about supply chain strategy, industry shifts, and family updates. Looking at the clock on Friday afternoon at 4:15, I considered calling Wallace to cancel. Did I want to show up as a terminated employee? I decided to go. I owed Wallace the courtesy of an in-person explanation, and perhaps he could offer guidance or industry referrals for my next career step. I drove toward the restaurant through the familiar industrial corridor. As I pulled into the parking lot at 4:45, my phone vibrated in the console. Wallace Abernathy's name flashed across the screen. I unclipped the phone and answered, "Walter, where are you located?" Wallace's voice came through the speaker with an unusual sharpness. "The quarterly regional executive review begins in 25 minutes at the central facility. Your division manager keeps claiming you are unavailable and off-site. What is going on? I am not off-site by choice, Wallace, I answered calmly. Chadwick Drake terminated my employment yesterday afternoon. He informed me he had located a replacement willing to work for 50% of my salary. The phone line went completely silent. For 10 long seconds, the only sound was the faint ambient rustle of corporate paperwork from Wallace's end. He did what? Wallace demanded, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of icy steel. He terminated me yesterday at 4:15, I repeated. He instructed me to pack my personal belongings and leave a knowledge transfer document for my replacement. I am reviewing the executive agenda. Right this second, Wallace said, his anger barely contained. You are listed as the primary presenter for the $350 million regional optimization strategy, the Tier 1 Supplier Compliance Report, and the multi-state infrastructure expansion. We have conducted this executive review together every quarter for 9 years. You have never missed a single session. I was fully prepared to present, I told him. Until Chadwick called me into his office and revoked my employment. Another heavy pause followed. Stay by your phone, Walter. Do not turn it off, Wallace instructed sternly, then ended the call. I sat in my truck, looking out at the late afternoon sun reflecting off the glass windows of the industrial park. 20 minutes passed. Then my phone rang again. It was an unknown corporate extension. Hello, Walter. This is Audrey from Corporate Human Resources in Chicago, a woman's voice said, typing rapidly in the background. I am calling to investigate a personnel action logged under your employee identifier yesterday afternoon. Can you confirm that Chadwick Drake executed an immediate termination of your employment contract? Yes, Audrey, I confirmed. Yesterday at 4:15 in the afternoon, did Mr. Drake provide authorized severance documentation, corporate legal disclosures, or formal executive authorization signatures from Vice President Abernathy's office? No, I replied. He stated that corporate restructuring required cost reduction and that my 14 years of experience were being replaced by digital automation. The sound of intense keyboard entry continued for nearly 30 seconds. I see, Audrey said, her tone professional yet deeply concerned. Chadwick Drake possessed zero statutory authority to execute an executive-level termination without Vice President Abernathy's written concurrence and HR legal clearance. Under our corporate bylaws, this action constitutes an unauthorized breach of managerial duty and is legally void ab initio. Thank you for your time, Walter. Senior executive leadership will be contacting you shortly. She hung up, leaving me in the quiet cabin of my truck as the realization sank in. Chadwick had let his arrogance blind him to basic corporate governance. 3 hours later, as I was sitting at the dinner table with Sarah, Brandon, and Nathan, my phone began ringing incessantly. The caller display showed Chadwick Drake's direct office line. I allowed it to ring through to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Sarah looked at me and nodded gently. I tapped the screen and placed the call on speaker. Walter. Chadwick's voice burst through the speaker, devoid of his usual polished composure. He sounded frantic, breathing heavily as if he had been pacing his office for hours. Walter, there has been a severe administrative misunderstanding. We require your immediate presence at the regional facility. I took a slow sip of water before responding. Good evening, Chadwick. What administrative misunderstanding are you referring to? There was a procedural miscommunication regarding corporate HR protocol. Chadwick stammered, his words tumbling over each other. Your personnel status change was not properly cleared through the appropriate executive channels. We need you to return to your position on Monday morning at 8 in the morning. We can completely expunge Thursday's conversation from your file. What became of your digital transformation candidate who was willing to work for 50% of my compensation? I asked quietly. That candidate is no longer viable for the role. Look, Walter, this was simply an unfortunate operational miscalculation. We acknowledge your extensive familiarization with the network. You are vital to our multi-state operations. Vital? I echoed, letting the word hang in the air. Yesterday, you informed me that 14 years of supply chain engineering was legacy, thinking easily replaced by a spreadsheet. The executive vice president requires the quarterly operational analytics for the board of directors. Chadwick pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. Nobody else possesses the source data or understands how the spatial algorithms synthesize the 12-state distribution logs. The entire executive board is demanding the presentation. Nobody else possesses the analysis because you terminated the person who designed the entire system from the ground up, I said firmly. Walter, please, I am asking you to be reasonable, Chadwick begged, completely abandoning his MBA arrogance. Name your terms. We can discuss a salary adjustment, a title modification, whatever you require. Just return on Monday morning. I stood up from the table, looking at Sarah and my sons, who were watching with proud smiles. I spent 14 years building Heartland Logistics into a $350 million powerhouse, I said calmly. I did so under leadership that valued integrity. I will not return to serve a manager who views dedicated human experience as a disposable line item. Good luck with your quarterly review, Chadwick. I ended the call before he could respond. That weekend was one of the most liberating periods of my life. For the first time in 14 years, I was not checking late-night freight manifests, tracking blizzard warnings across Iowa and Illinois, or resolving emergency shipping disputes. Sarah and I took long walks through the state park, and I spent quality time helping Brandon with his engineering project and discussing software architecture with Nathan. On Monday morning at 8 in the morning, Chadwick called my phone 7 times in rapid succession. I ignored every call. By 10 in the morning, my phone began ringing from different numbers, direct lines from warehouse managers, freight dispatchers, and regional logistics supervisors across the Midwest. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Keith Williams, the veteran logistics supervisor at our Detroit distribution hub, called my personal mobile. Walter, I know you are no longer with the company, Keith said, his voice strained with anxiety. But we are facing an absolute operational disaster here. We have a massive shipment of precision transmission components that was scheduled for delivery to a major vehicle assembly plant 2 hours ago. And nobody can locate the inventory in the system. Chadwick's new system candidate searched Zone 8 for 4 hours and found nothing. Check Zone 14, Keith, I told him calmly. Climate-controlled storage, upper rack section B, marked with blue regulatory tags. Silence fell over the line, followed by a heavy sigh of relief. Zone 14, of course. You moved heat-sensitive components there during the summer expansion. Thank you, Walter, Keith exclaimed. This new guy has been wandering around like a lost child for 4 hours. 30 minutes later, another regional supervisor called from our Indianapolis hub. A major freight carrier had arrived with incorrect brake assembly shipments, and nobody on site knew how to process statutory vendor rejection forms without triggering financial penalties. I walked him through the legal compliance steps over the phone. Throughout the remainder of the week, the calls continued to stream into my personal line. Heartland Logistics was descending into operational chaos. Shipments were misrouted, climate-sensitive automotive components, degraded due to improper staging temperatures, and key manufacturing clients were issuing formal notices of contract default. Chadwick called again on Wednesday afternoon, his voice completely broken. Walter, please. Everything is collapsing, he sobbed openly. Orders are missing. Suppliers are threatening legal action under breach of fiduciary duty statutes, and the temporary replacement quit after 4 hours. On the job. He claimed the position was entirely different from the basic data entry role I described. What did you expect, Chadwick? I asked coldly. You believed 14 years of logistical mastery could be executed by someone reading a basic manual. You never bothered to learn how the business functioned. You only cared about presenting glossy dashboards to corporate leadership. I am begging you, Walter. Come back. I will step aside. I will give you complete operational autonomy, he pleaded. You should have valued the work when you had the opportunity, I replied. I hung up and blocked his office number. During the 4th week of my transition, Wallace Abernathy called me from corporate headquarters. Walter, how are you holding up? He asked warmly. I am doing well, Wallace. Engaging in selective consulting and evaluating new opportunities, I answered. I wanted to inform you that corporate governance has initiated a formal internal audit into Chadwick Drake's management of the regional division, Wallace shared. His unauthorized actions violated internal controls. breached fiduciary obligations to shareholders, and resulted in substantial financial dissipation of assets under statutory corporate standards. He is currently facing severe administrative discipline and potential termination. He brought it upon himself, I noted. Indeed he did, Wallace agreed. Some executives only learn the true value of foundational talent when the structure collapses around them. You gave 14 noble years to Heartland, Walter. You owe that office nothing more. While the collapse of Heartland Logistics was unfolding across industry news, I focused my full energy on securing a position where true expertise was respected. I was not interested in rushing into another corporate environment where middle managers prioritize buzzwords over operational substance. I interviewed with 3 major firms: a national freight distributor, an industrial equipment manufacturer, and Apex Supply Chain Logistics, a rapidly growing regional powerhouse expanding throughout the Midwest. My interview with Apex Supply Chain Logistics was conducted directly by their Chief Executive Officer, Eleanor Crawford. Eleanor was a 58-year-old industry veteran who had built Apex from a small local fleet into a $200 million enterprise through sharp strategic vision and deep respect for her workforce. She walked me through their main distribution facility personally, pointing out operational bottlenecks and asking for my candid assessment. "What is your philosophy on modernizing complex supply networks, Walter?" Eleanor asked, as we stood on the mezzanine, overlooking the bustling warehouse floor. "Logistics is fundamentally about human trust and systemic precision," I answered thoughtfully. "Automation and software are valuable tools, but they cannot replace institutional knowledge, deep supplier relationships, and hands-on problem-solving. If you try to manage a supply chain purely through spreadsheets, the entire network will break the moment an unexpected crisis occurs." Eleanor smiled broadly, nodding in complete agreement. "That is precisely why I wanted to meet you, Walter. We have seen far too many competitors ruin their operations by replacing experienced leaders with cheap software solutions. We need someone with your 14 years of proven mastery to lead our multi-state expansion." 2 days later, Eleanor extended a formal offer: Director of Supply Chain Systems at Apex Supply Chain Logistics, featuring a base salary of $160,000 annually, full health benefits, performance bonuses, and equity participation in the company's growth. It was a $25,000 increase over my previous compensation at Heartland, but more importantly, it offered absolute operational autonomy under leadership that truly understood the industry. I accepted the position with immense pride. Sarah, Brandon, and Nathan were ecstatic when we celebrated at dinner that evening. The burden of tuition worries vanished, replaced by a profound sense of vindication and excitement for the future. Meanwhile, the operational decay at Heartland Logistics reached a catastrophic tipping point. Without my oversight, Chadwick's team routinely botched delivery schedules, shipped incorrect component specifications to manufacturing plants, and failed to maintain required buffer stocks. In my second month at Apex, I received a phone call from Gordon Stevens. Gordon was the president of Stevens Precision Transmissions, a major supplier I had partnered with for 10 years at Heartland. "Walter, I just heard you transition to Apex Supply Chain Logistics," Gordon said warmly. "We are having an absolute nightmare dealing with Heartland Logistics. Chadwick Drake's team has lost 3 of our major shipments this month alone, and when I attempted to address the issue with Chadwick, he had the audacity to lecture me on automated logistics frameworks. We have worked together for 10 years, Walter. I trust your operational management. Does Apex have the capacity to handle our transmission distribution contract?" I brought Gordon's inquiry directly to Eleanor Crawford. Within 2 weeks, Apex finalized a comprehensive logistics agreement with Stevens Precision Transmissions, transferring $4 million in annual contract value from Heartland to Apex. A month later, Bernard Walsh, the chief operating officer of Walsh Brake Assemblies, another primary supplier I had managed for 8 years, called me with the exact same grievance. Heartland's chaotic management had resulted in thousands of dollars in delayed freight charges and damaged client relationships. Bernard promptly canceled Walsh Brake Assembly's contract with Heartland and migrated their $8 million distribution account to Apex. Over the next 4 months, 3 additional major automotive suppliers voluntarily severed their ties with Heartland Logistics and transferred their business to Apex Supply Chain Logistics. In total, $12 million in annual supplier contracts migrated directly to Apex. Not because I engaged in aggressive client solicitation, but because Tier 1 suppliers valued reliable execution and trusted the personal integrity I had established over 14 years of service. One afternoon, Eleanor Crawford walked into my office with a glowing smile. "Walter, your leadership has brought $12 million in top-tier supplier partnerships to Apex in less than 5 months. That is extraordinary business growth." "I did not actively recruit them, Eleanor," I admitted honestly. "They reached out because they were suffering under Heartland's operational breakdown." "I know," Eleanor replied, placing a hand on my desk, "and that is what makes it so powerful. In this industry, executive titles can be handed out easily, but genuine professional trust is earned through years of flawless execution. Those suppliers followed your reputation, not a corporate logo." Later that week, Wallace Abernathy called me for a casual catch-up. "I hear you are acquiring all of Heartland's major supplier contracts," Wallace said, chuckling softly over the phone. "They made independent commercial decisions based on operational performance." "Wallace," I noted politely. "You do not need to defend it, Walter," Wallace assured me. "Chadwick Drake's gross mismanagement broke fiduciary duty standards and severely damaged corporate asset values. The board of directors officially terminated Chadwick last Friday for catastrophic failure of executive oversight. Corporate governance has appointed a new regional director, but the damage to Heartland's market reputation is done. You deserved better than how Chadwick treated you, Walter." Sometimes an executive mistake is the exact catalyst needed to propel a true leader toward greater success. Hearing Wallace confirm Chadwick's formal dismissal brought a quiet sense of closure. Chadwick had believed he could eliminate 14 years of experience with zero consequences. Instead, his own arrogance had dismantled his career and transferred $12 million in enterprise value to a competitor. 10 months into my tenure at Apex Supply Chain Logistics, Eleanor Crawford called me into the executive boardroom. "Walter, our rapid growth demands that we establish a second regional distribution hub in Ohio to manage our expanding Midwestern footprint," she announced. "I want you to oversee the design, construction, and operational implementation of the Ohio facility from the ground up. Furthermore, the board has approved your promotion to Executive Director of Supply Chain Operations, with a revised compensation structure reflecting your immense contributions. Designing the new Ohio distribution center was deeply fulfilling. I was able to implement my spatial optimization algorithms, install state-of-the-art climate control systems, and establish rock-solid operational protocols without interference from arrogant middle managers. To ensure long-term operational sustainability, I hired an assistant manager, Shane Peterson. Shane was 27 years old, held a degree in industrial engineering, and possessed a rare combination of intellectual curiosity and professional humility. Unlike Chadwick Drake, Shane did not arrive pretending to know everything. He spent his first 3 months on the warehouse floor, observing how freight moved, asking thoughtful questions, and taking detailed notes on supply chain mechanics. Mentoring Shane reminded me of my early days in the industry. I taught him how to analyze vendor delivery patterns, how to anticipate winter freight disruptions, and how to maintain strict compliance with federal regulatory statutes. I shared the custom algorithms I had developed under 17 U.S. Code, Section 106, ensuring he understood the underlying mathematics rather than just reading output dashboards. Shane absorbed every lesson with enthusiasm and deep respect. Within 7 months, he was executing daily distribution workflows with high precision, allowing me to focus on strategic network expansion. This was authentic leadership and true succession planning. Not firing an experienced director and hoping a novice figures it out, but intentionally transferring knowledge, nurturing talent, and building systems that endure. 14 months after my departure from Heartland Logistics, I received a phone call from Joel Rodriguez. Joel had worked as a warehouse receiving lead at Heartland for 9 years. "Walter, this is Joel Rodriguez," he said warmly. I do not know if you recall, but 4 years ago, I made a severe inventory tagging error during a massive night shift that nearly cost the company thousands of dollars. I was terrified I would be fired. You stayed 4 hours past your shift to help me resort the entire staging area, took full responsibility in the incident report, and taught me how to double-check freight manifests properly. I remember that night well, Joel, I said softly. You were a dedicated worker who made an honest mistake. I am calling because I officially resigned from Heartland Logistics yesterday, Joel revealed. I accepted a senior inventory management role at a new logistics firm. I wanted to call and thank you before I left. When Chadwick terminated you 14 years into your career, it sent a shockwave through the entire facility. 8 of our senior warehouse veterans have resigned over the past year because we realized that if the company could cast you aside, after everything you built, none of our loyalty meant anything to them. You showed us what real leadership looked like, Walter. We never forgot how you treated us. After ending the call with Joel, I sat in my office overlooking the thriving Ohio distribution floor. Joel's words resonated deeply within me. I had spent years believing my primary contribution was building spatial algorithms and optimizing supply chain logistics. But true leadership was never about spreadsheets, executive titles, or corporate authority. It was about consistency, integrity, and treating people with dignity. Chadwick Drake had tried to reduce 14 years of dedicated service to a single line item on a spreadsheet, believing that human expertise was easily disposable. In doing so, he destroyed his own career, lost $12 million in enterprise contracts, and dismantled the operational foundation of his division. Meanwhile, I was standing in a position of greater strength, surrounded by a thriving enterprise, supported by a loving family, and mentoring the next generation of logistics leaders. Standing on true value and maintaining unwavering integrity will always outlast corporate arrogance.